All right, welcome back into Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. As we've been discussing here, right now you're looking at some of what people have been calling panic buying that's been happening as a result of this work stoppage at some of the nation's biggest ports throughout the East and Gulf coasts. If you're just tuning in and you just missed our report in New York, the East and Gulf coasts, of course, have been the top of the news cycle this week. The work stoppage is now over after the strike, at least it is. For now, we've been reporting on this all week. It's been a major deal. Workers at some of the nation's biggest ports walking out on the job, angling for better pay and to deter automation from impacting their roles. Today, a tentative deal being reached tonight. Joe Camberato is a supply chain expert and the CEO of National Business Capital. Joe, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Always good to see you, Austin.
So let's just first start with the basics here. Let's catch people up. Here's what we do know about the deal. Tentative deal is until January 15th. Port workers returning immediately with 62% wage increase. A committee has been formed on automation in the ports. The 90 days is going to be used to negotiate a new 6-year contract. Okay, so this story isn't over yet, obviously. We could be back in this mess in January, but let's talk about the last 3 days, Joe. Those ports were effectively closed for 72 hours, correct? Will that have a tangible impact on everyday items, or were people doing all that panic buying for nothing?
Well, it's never a bad idea to be prepared. It's not good to panic, but to prepare is not a bad idea, because if this, went on for weeks, as we talked about, earlier in the week, it would have been a big problem. Those people would have been very smart. I think for these 3 days, I don't think there's going to be a major impact. You still have, Sunday you had around 3 ships, docked out there, and now you have 45 ships that are docked. So it's still, it's a great deal of ships, and it's not, you just can't, now that they're going to open back up, on Friday, it's not that easy to just start unloading those ships. So I don't know, maybe you have some minor challenges in perishable goods. And things like that maybe don't make it as long. But I don't think it's going to be that big of an impact. And thank God that they're able to come to some sort of terms and not let this go longer.
Perishable goods wise, is that something that we would see this weekend? If people head to the grocery store on Sunday, could they notice that bananas may not be in stock? Are we talking about that kind of stuff here?
Yeah, I think you'd probably I think bananas is like one of the big hot topics. And I think you'd probably see that this weekend and probably early next week. But as ships come back in, I think you'd see that pick up, right away. So I think we should be all good as long as everything goes accordingly and they start, unloading ships Friday.
Yeah. So does this mean shippers now have time to prepare for another stoppage in January? Obviously, January, the middle of January is when the next cycle comes through. This is only going to be lasting for 90 days. Does that give the union less leverage, and does this give the shipping companies time to prepare for a potential stoppage in January?
Listen, if they can't nail this deal in 90 days, that's a really big problem, and that's an issue. I think within the 90 days they should be able to square this away. And at this point, it seems like they're meeting, a lot of the demands. I think just, as anyone in business that's tied to this stuff, I'd still would just hedge against that and take advantage of ordering maybe some extra inventory. I don't think you need to go crazy and over order, but I think it would be a smart idea just to be prepared. Because listen, a deal's not a deal until it's done, right? But God help us if they can't nail this thing down in 90 days.
Both sides said in a statement that they're extending this contract through January in order to return to the bargaining table to negotiate all outstanding issues. We do have a statement here from the ILA, the International Longshoremen Association, and the United States Maritime Alliance Limited have reached a tentative agreement on wages and have agreed to extend the master contract until January 15th, 2025 to return to the bargaining table to negotiate all other outstanding issues. Effective immediately, all current job actions will cease and all work covered by the master contract will resume. The outstanding issues piece to that piques my interest, Joe. What are the outstanding issues? Is automation likely the big one?
The big one is automation. There really hasn't been much talk about anything else, and that's been a big focus. I think, though, it's very unrealistic for anyone for a union to make any type of business say that, hey, we're not going to automate. We're in an age where innovation and automation, it's happening and it's moving fast. And if you don't embrace innovation and automation, you'll be left behind. I mean, think about Blockbuster, Kodak, these companies that decided, didn't innovate. They're gone. They're no longer here. I think that, both the Maritime Alliance and the unions, I think they need to work together. They need to embrace innovation and automation. And I think with those, automations, will also come new jobs. And I think they need to embrace training around those new jobs. And maybe they can shift some of those workers into better jobs that are less dangerous. There's a lot of dangers working out in these ports. And to be quite frank, unfortunately, our U.S. ports are way behind in automation, and they're not ran as efficiently as they are in other countries. We have other countries that are way ahead of automation. They're running more efficiently, and it's less dangerous, and there's less deaths. So I don't understand why they wouldn't embrace that. I think it's very foolish, and I think it's insane to think that to force any business to say that you can't innovate and automate. That's like a slow death.
What type of automation do other countries have that we don't?
I mean, you literally have, it's really interesting. It's fascinating. You should look this stuff up. I mean, literally, where these robots basically are ran from command stations, and you can run them very safely and be out of the way. And out of the, out of harm's way from the big containers, and they can literally move these containers around from, a temperature-controlled office, they're joysticks and they're very elaborate, systems. And I think it's amazing that we don't have any of this stuff here, especially when we're home to some of the world's best technology companies.
The deal is supposed to bring the workers back immediately. I just talked about this with Teresa before the commercial break. Do you have any contacts at any of these affected ports, Joe? As far as you know, are dock workers back in their positions tonight? What are you hearing?
I'm not exactly clear in that yet. The businesses that I've been speaking to, and I've spoken to some very large businesses that ship out commodities. So everything's been about things getting shipped in. People are also having challenges with shipping out products and goods. And right now, a good friend of mine who owns a very large waste management business can't ship cardboard out and had to rent a facility, and they're piling up inventory because they can't get the goods back out of the U.S. To be recycled. So it's definitely a big issue, and I hope these workers will for sure be back tomorrow.
Does this tentative deal feel like a win for the ILA? Does it feel like a concession, something in between? What does it feel like?
I mean, they got a 62% increase, in pay, for workers. Again, the automation thing, I do think is very unrealistic and unfair. But what no one's really talking about is, these contracts are 6 years long. So when these contracts were negotiated, they built inflation and increases in along the way. What's happened, though, during this current administration, and overspending, inflation has gone through the roof. So what was probably a great contract feels like it wasn't, and inflation has gone out of hand, where the dock workers are really feeling it. Separately, I just don't understand why they let it get to this point. And I also don't understand how the unions have such power and control over all of these ports, to be able to get to, to be able to put, a strike like this in place and put the economy, at risk, just seems pretty insane to me.
Is it a stretch to say that maybe the pandemic put this industry in more of the public's psyche and maybe gave them some leverage when they came to the negotiating table for this type of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the pandemic, I think, definitely woke up the whole world to saying, hey, We need to really think about our supply chain. We really need to think about bringing manufacturing back, to the U.S. I mean, that was a topic that the Trump administration was talking about, prior to. And there was a big push to get manufacturing back. Then COVID happened. Everyone realized what big of a deal it is. So yeah, I think there's a lot of focus on it, a lot of attention, and you probably had a lot of stress going on, obviously then, during COVID, and then, coming out of COVID as things got back to it, you had this pumped up demand. So, a ton of things, oversupply of things coming in, which probably put a lot of stress on the dock workers. And then at the same time, you had inflation that went, through the roof. And people are really feeling it, in their paychecks. Wages have not been able to keep up with the pace of inflation. So we can't keep renegotiating these contracts year over year if we don't, really get a handle on inflation and also start to bring down some of the cost of these goods, because inflation's slowing, but the cost of goods are not going back down, and that's a problem.
You alluded to this earlier. Reuters says at least 45 container vessels that have been unable to unload were anchored outside the strike hit East Coast and Gulf Coast ports by Wednesday. That's up from 3 before the strike began on Sunday. So we're talking about 45 container vessels that were impacted by the closure, basically. What does these backlog ships, what do these ships do now? Is it going to be a quick and easy process to get their cargo unloaded and to really get things back rolling again?
Easy, no. And there's, people can work around the clock in double time, but, you have these ships that have hundreds of containers on them. You can only move these containers around so quickly. So literally these ships are just going to have to get in line, and they're only going to be able to unload these ships, so fast.
I got to ask you, one more thing before we go here. President Biden, of course, throwing his support behind the ILA during these negotiations. Did it feel like that had an impact so far?
I just think that there hasn't been any type of strong support to anything going on in the world right now, coming out of the current administration. These are our ports. And it's amazing. You have Governor DeSantis in Florida who enlisted the National Guard to keep the ports moving, and you have no other type of actions being taken at any of these other ports. And these ports control half the goods that are coming into the U.S. So it's really shocking, and I think disappointing how lightly it seems like this was communicated and taken from the current administration.
All right, so we are going to leave it at that for now. We do appreciate you, Joe, for coming on tonight. Thanks for staying up late with us. We'll keep in touch. Hopefully we don't have to talk again on January 15th.
I hope so too, but it's always good to see you. Right. Thanks, Austin. Be well.
Yep, have a good night.